Okay, we're going to continue the second portion of the SimCreator DX basics, which is our experiment and scenario overview. So this is going to touch on the experiment configuration as well as some basics in scenario. Our next training will be on Monday, and that will focus on SimCreator DX advanced training. So that'll be more focused on being able to create your own scenarios, how to develop a scenario, how to create a maneuver, stuff like that. So this one is just going to be an overview of being able to understand all the different things that go into an experiment and a scenario, as well as all the different tools that you have access to. So feel free to stop me if you have any questions, but we're just going to kind of show the different tools that you have and configurations that you can use for an experiment. So, experiments include many data files. They include activation lists, scenarios, vehicles, driver behavior, databases, etc. These are all found in the same location as your experiment file, and there's typically a they're what we call XML files that have these different characteristics according to them. So we'll show those characteristics as well. And the configuration window allows for modification, so we'll take a look at that, and that's where these XML files are. And all experiments are saved as .exexp files. So if you wanted to create a new experiment from scratch, you can hit the New Experiment button or select File, New Experiment. You can create a new experiment instead of using Database Convert. However, Database Convert just makes it a little easier because it autofills the information for you for your database and terrain. So what we're going to do right now is we're just going to go into SimCreator DX, and we're going to take a look at the configuration for our tile world that we created earlier today. So I went to File, I opened Tile World, the experiments that I made, and I can see my experiment here in my main window. And if I go to File and say Configure Experiment, this will open a new window. This window here tells me all the characteristics of my experiment. So it gives me my experiment name. It also gives me the different databases that I'm using. As you can see here, there is a tileworld.ive, a tileworld vermal, and a tileworld oxdr. You might recognize those extensions because those are the ones that we used when we were running database convert. So all of these files are needed for Fusion and for SimCreator DX. So these are the characteristics of that specific database that that we built. So you can, if you wanted to create a new experiment, you can just input these yourself instead of having to use database convert to do it. But in order to get the IVE file as well as in order to get the XODR file, you still need to use database convert. So it's a little bit easier to do it that way. However, things like these database profiles at the bottom, you can configure and adjust to match, different characteristics that you might want in your scenario. So we'll look at a few of these. If you want more information on all this, you can find it in the SimCreator DX manual. But we'll look at a few that might be a little important to you or to your study. So one of them might be the vehicle profile sets. So if I go to this icon here, this is Edit Vehicle Profile Sets. This will open a new profile for me to look at. I'm just going to quickly drop that in here. So this profile set allows me to look at specific parameters that I've already that has been already adjusted in your maneuver. So if I were to, let's say, close this right now and open up the toolbox and go to ambient traffic, and I were to right click on ambient traffic and select new configuration, then I'll see here in my new configuration that I have an option to select a vehicle profile set. And I also have an option to select a behavior profile set. So these vehicle profile sets are the same ones that I saw in my XML file. So if I just look at, so right now I have ambient traffic, bicycles, cars with doors, one vehicle, trailers, and then in my behavior I have aggressive and average. So if I were to go back into my configure experiments, go back to my vehicle profile set, I will also see in there, I'll see ambient traffic, bicycles, cars with doors, one vehicle, and trailers. So let's say I wanted to create another vehicle profile set because I wanted to have maybe specific types of vehicles in my ambient traffic. You can go in here and you can change and create a new profile, name that profile, and then go into the actual vehicles, and I can actually select which vehicles I want and how frequent these vehicles are going to appear. So this allows you to adjust to better fit what specific vehicles you might be looking at. So maybe I don't want any military vehicles, and maybe I don't want any emergency vehicles, and I just want to have, you know, cars and sedans around the area. Then I can select these specific things. And then if I wanted maybe more of one specific type of car, like a bus, to happen more than an automobile, I can change the frequency of these so that they would be less frequent. So frequency of 0 and 1, 0 being less frequent, 1 being less frequent. You can also change to uniform, and uniform will make everything the same frequency, so they have the same probability of showing up. So if you want to have a uniform distribution of all the different vehicles, you can use that uniform here, or you can use normalize, and that will also give you a normalized distribution. Does anyone have any questions on profile sets? So now if I were to save this profile set, I now have a custom one in my vehicle profile set. So if I were to go back into my toolbox and go to ambient traffic and create a new configuration, I will now see custom as my profile, and I can use that custom profile that I just made. So we'll talk about maneuvers and configuration sets in a bit, but that was just an example of something that you can do in your configure experiment. In your experiment configuration window. In addition, we have driver profile sets and obstacle profile sets, and all of these work very similar. So for the driver profile set, this allows us to select how aggressive how passive the ambient traffic can be. This allows you to kind of make it a little bit of your own. Keep in mind, these frequencies are probabilities, so just because you make everything reckless doesn't mean that every vehicle is going to be reckless, right? Because there's still a probability of it not happening, so just keep that in mind. So in addition to that, you can adjust the vehicle XML. The vehicle XML is the actual configuration for all the different vehicles in Fusion. So if there's a specific vehicle that you wanted to have a specific dynamics model for, or if you wanted to change the dynamics model for that vehicle, you can go into here and adjust each specific vehicle that we provide in Fusion. This can get very time consuming, but we do have some dynamics models available that you can adjust other parameters as well too. So typically we have these all set to standard. We do have some different changes to like wheelbase because some of the vehicles are bigger than the others. So you can make more adjustments to these vehicles. Just keep in mind that you are changing the vehicles for all of the experiments at this point. So if you wanted to make something specific, then I would recommend that you save this vehicles.xml file as another XML file. So like say it's a vehicles 2 or something along those lines. That way any changes that you make to these files won't affect your other coworkers or classmates or whatever. So yeah, so there's quite a bit of adjustment that you can make. In addition, there's controller timings for signals. You can adjust the signal timings, stuff like that, for the duration of each one of these phase times and so on. So this allows you to make some adjustments to how the phase times work. So if you're doing something specific or you want to track some type of traffic condition, you can use the controller timings to adjust those signal types, signal phase times. Are there any other questions? Any questions on this right now? All right, so we're going to move on to scenario overview. So experiments can include any number of scenarios. You can define these scenarios and add maneuvers, traffic situations, and objects to them, and they save with your experiment data. So in order to create a new scenario, we use the scenario toolbar. So if you go back to SimCreator DX in developer mode, you will see the scenario toolbar right here. So this is our scenario toolbar. It has a play button, a scenario drop-down window, new, edit, delete, import, and I'm telling you what the active scenario is that's running right now. So if I were to go back to the presentation, you'll see all of that information as well. So in generic world day, which is what we provide, we already have some basic scenarios that you can take a look at. But if you are creating your own custom experiment, once you create your experiment, you will have a blank canvas to create your scenarios on. So we'll go through an example of creating a scenario, adding a route, doing all that. But here's some basic information about when you open a scenario. So, sorry. If I were to go into generic world day and I were to edit a scenario here, I'm going to select scenario 8, which is one that I just changed. But you can see it's a blank canvas, there's nothing there, but it opens up another window. So this is our scenario window here that just opened up for me. So when I click a new scenario, it'll prompt me to select the scenario name and description. So it allows you to identify it. And once you've identified what you want your scenario to be called, then you click OK, and it'll open up that same scenario window. If I, for instance, don't want that anymore, I can go into it and delete it. That'll delete the scenario from the experiment. Any changes I make to my scenario, I have to save my scenario first, and then it'll give me an asterisk for my experiment, and I can save my experiment after that. So there is some safety in there that if you're making any changes to a scenario and you want to back out of them, you don't have to save the scenario, or you don't have to save the experiment, vice versa. So over here, so if I go to scenario, whatever scenario that I have, I click edit. Now I'm kind of in the same window as this picture here. So I'm going to talk about the different aspects of the scenario window in just a second. Okay, so the layout scenario route is a way for us to draw a route that we want the participant to navigate. So when you create your road network through ISA and import that into SimCreator DX, you're allowed to create routes using our route layout tool. And this allows you to draw the specific road network that you'd like the participant to drive on. Then you can place a start point, place maneuvers, add maneuvers either on a proximity sensor or time sensor, and then you can test these scenarios when you're developing. So if you kind of understand the gist of it, we'll actually show how to create a basic scenario as well. So in addition to the scenario toolbar, you also in the scenario window have some additional tools to use. You'll recognize some of these zooms because they were the same as the main window, but in addition you have a few more things like the open route mode, configure display, set a start point, save, clone, run, and toggle the toolbox. So we'll kind of go through a few of these and you'll get a little bit more accustomed to it. In addition, we have something called the monitor mode. The monitor mode is a padlock that allows you to edit maneuvers or change things on the fly. This is typically locked to prevent any unintentional changes while you are developing your scenario, but you can unlock it if you're wanting to maybe see an object or something like that very quickly and not have to run a scenario over and over again to see what that specific object is. So we'll show that as an example as well. Also keep in mind when you're adding direct activation, when you're adding a maneuver to direct activation, you can do that in the scenario tool, but you cannot do that when you're on live. You have to unlock padlock to do so. So let's do a scenario example real quick, and then we'll go into more detail about that tomorrow. But just in the case of this, right now we'll kind of do an example. So I'm going to open SimCreator DX. I'm just going to open generic world day. I'm going to create a new experiment. So I'm going to click this white page here. You guys can follow along if you want as well. This will add a new scenario. I can change the scenario to whatever I'd like. In this case, I'm not going to do that because I already have one open, but you can name your scenario. Let's say you want to change the name of your scenario after you've done that. You can go into this notepad right here. This allows you to rename and change the description of your scenario. So nothing's set in stone, you can still make changes. Now that you can see that I have pretty much the same window open right now on my main view as I do in my scenario window. So it's the same world, I can navigate it the same way, but essentially this is the world that I want to create my scenario in. So what I'm going to do is, in generic world day, we have the city area, which is in the middle. We have highways kind of going all the way around. And then we have some rural areas and a suburban area over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put us in the city because I want to do maybe a study in the city. So I'm going to use this long stretch of road as my start point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in until I can start seeing the road network. So I'm using my arrows to kind of like push myself where I want, and then I'm scrolling in to zoom in. So, does anyone have any issues with navigating? Now that I'm inside, you might see a line here. And if I move over again, I might see additional line. If I zoom out a little bit more, I might start seeing these lines. So these lines might be a little noticeable, but what they actually are is the separation between the tiles. So if we actually think about what we did previously this morning in ISA, is each one of these little sections was a tile that we pieced together to create our database. So you can kind of treat these as markers so that you understand how far between each one of these points is going to be 200 meters. So you can get a little bit used to knowing, okay, between this marker here is 200 meters. So when I'm creating a proximity sensor that has a specific distance before it gets triggered, I will know where in my route that will get triggered. So it's very important to kind of understand your pathing, and then in addition, when you create your route, it'll give you a route position, and you can use that information as well to help you understand. So what we'll do right now is we'll first create our own route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the route layout mode. When I select that, it's going to put me in route layout mode. So now my mouse is going to basically be the tool that I use to create my route. So if I were to click on a specific part in the road, it's going to then allow me to drag my mouse to start creating my route. And as you can see, at each one of these intersections, there will be a little white diamond that gets placed. So in addition to that, I can zoom in just a little bit, and you can start seeing there is a direction that will get placed when I'm making my route. So if I were to click this, you'll see an arrow, and that arrow is the direction at which my route is going. So it's going to start at 0 here, and my route position is going to continue to move to the right now. So I can continue to create my route, and what you can do is you can click and keep clicking, and it'll keep adding additional it'll append to your route. So as you continue to click, you can add more to the route. Another thing to note is you want to be kind of careful with this, because if I were to zoom out too far, my route can go a little too crazy and maybe run in on itself or something like that. So it makes it really easy if you were to be close and understand where you're drawing your route. I've seen a lot of people put their routes on top of each other, and that's not good because the data won't understand, or the scenario won't understand when something is triggered. So make sure that when you're drawing your route, you're doing it correctly. So I'm just doing something, just kind of drawing it all the way around. When I'm done creating my route, all I have to do is select that same button that I did previously, and that will close my route tool. So now I have a route that I can use, and in addition to that, this created route positions all the way throughout this green path. So when I'm adding a proximity sensor or adding or doing a direct activation, it'll tell me where in that route position that this had been activated. So instead of using absolute position, we use route position so that you can keep track of the exact same information without having to extrapolate that. So keep it try to treat it as like a your local coordinates. So after I create a route, I want to add a start point. This is similar to the start point that we added into our test world, our tile world that we made as an example. But in this case, instead of having to do it by using the scenario control, what we do is we use these two flags. This allows us to set a start point for our own ship. So what I did is I zoomed in to the start of my route, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the flags and then click on the position that I want my start point to be. I can move this around. Right now this is a 2-lane road, but there's also opposing 2 lanes as well. So I can put it on the right side here, or if I wanted to, I can make him go on the curb or something like that to start out. What I'll do is I'll have him start on the road on the right side. So that's the start point. It automatically will orientate the start point based on the direction of the route. So if the route was pointing the opposite direction, then the flags would have been rotated to point to that direction. So you don't have to set the orientation of the route, but if you wanted to, you can change the heading here. I double clicked this route here, and I can change these values. So if that is something that you want to do, you can, but it's a little bit easier to just add it there, call it good. Okay, so now I created a route and I added a start point. So, this is pretty much the beginning stages that you need when you're creating your scenario. You have a designated route that you want to have participants run through over and over again. And then now I have added a start point for my vehicle to start when I click play. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is maybe add some custom maneuvers that I created or that were provided to me so that I can create my scenario. So what I'll do is I'll open the toolbox. So I will select this toolbox icon and open the toolbox. And then I can go and look through these different maneuvers, and maybe there's one specific one that I wanted to use and add that as either a proximity sensor or a time sensor. So I'm going to want to have some ambient traffic, and since I'm in the city, I'm going to want to have some ambient pedestrians too. So I'm going to want it to be a light day, so I already have some two predefined light and heavy for ambient traffic. So if I go and edit the configuration, so I'm going to right click on light and edit, I can look at the configuration that was already made for ambient traffic. So I can look and see, alright, so light is the name of this configuration, that's the current parameters, its direction is everywhere, the rate, which is the rate at which they will spawn, it's the amount of cars per kilometer, that is 10, so I'll keep that the same. Creation radius is where they will spawn in relation to the ownership, so it's a radius in meters. This is at 600. If I were to look at something like heavy, it would be set to 300, which means that they're going to be created and populated closer to me to be kind of like a higher amount of traffic around me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this and say, yeah, I'm good with this. And what I want is I want my ambient traffic to come up right when I start my scenario. I don't want it to just come out of nowhere when my participant's driving. I want it to start at time 0. What I'm going to do is add this as a time sensor. So I'm going to take this from the toolbox and drag it to this stopwatch right here. And then it'll give me an option to create an instance. And it'll say, at what time do you want to create this instance? I'm going to keep it at time 0. I'm going to click OK, and now I have added the ambient traffic maneuver to start at time 0.
So this time window is a start point?
No, the time window is your time sensor.
So you mean the ambient traffic will start at time 0, so this time 0 is once the vehicle starts to drive, or?
Once you click play.
Okay, once you click play, so once the experiment starts.
Yeah. Okay. So it's sim time. It's related to the simulation time. Yes. Yeah. And then I'm also going to want to have some ambient pedestrians. I also have an option between dense and light, since I want to probably do light as well. I'll look at this information, make sure it's okay to what I like. If I wanted to create a new configuration that maybe isn't dense or light, I can select the ambient pedestrian, right click it and select new configuration. Then I can change this to whatever I want and then make my type and configuration how I like. So that is kind of a nice way to adjust and make sure that things are working as you should. Keep in mind, you can see that there's a configuration for the height. So if you are making an adjustment to that, make sure you bring that height value over because that will push the ambient pedestrians up or down on the actual roads. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to left click and drag that over to a time sensor and add it at time 0. Question? Okay. So now I have both ambient traffic and ambient pedestrians in my world with a start point and a route. The next thing I'm probably going to want to do is add some type of scenario or some type of maneuver in that might, be what I want. So let's say I want to do my research on distracted driving, or I want to do my research on, the reaction of the driver. So what I'm going to look in is I'm going to add a cut in or a cut off maneuver at a specific proximity sensor during the route. So I'm going to let the person drive around a little bit, and then I'm going to, introduce something to have them react to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the cut off maneuver here. I'm going to see, okay, so there's some parameters here. I can select the vehicle type, I can select the time to collision, and I can select the trigger distance.
I'm looking at the vehicle type.
Oh yeah. So you can go in here and you can change the vehicle type to all the different vehicles that we have in Fusion. So I can change the vehicle type to a motorcyclist, or I can change the vehicle type to a limo, for instance. What I'll do is I'll maybe keep it as a Toyota Tacoma or something like that. And then you can change your time to collision. Your time to collision is in seconds. So this would be the time it'll calculate the speed you're going and the distance you are at, and it'll put the vehicle in front of you at a specific time to collision. So yes.
So when it calculates the time to collision, does it consider the automated vehicle's speed?
Yeah.
So, but you here write the trigger distance is 100 and the time to collision is 5 seconds.
Yeah. So your trigger distance.
So what's the relative speed of the vehicle?
It depends on the speed of the ownership, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's going to adjust its speed based off of that.
Okay. And the vehicle will appear
at 100 meters past the well, so okay, so it depends, right? If you're going 60 miles an hour in the city, then you're probably going to want to put your trigger distance further out so that you don't see it appear right in front of you, right? But since the city's only rated for 35 miles an hour, then 100 meters is probably good enough, and you won't notice that that ambient vehicle has been triggered, right? So the trigger distance is the distance after the proximity sensor has been hit. So you pass the proximity sensor, then the vehicle comes in 100 meters or in front of you or whatever. So you can actually go into show maneuver documentation, and this will give you more information on this specific maneuver. So it'll give you some information about the trigger distance and all the different parameters that you can use. So what we'll do here is we'll keep that the same and that the same. I'm going to click OK, and then this will give me a new configuration here for my specific maneuver. So now I know that I need at least 100 meters after my proximity sensor for this specific maneuver to work correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this and put it on my route, and you can see already that it gives me a route position of where I'm placing it. So I know that, okay, this over here is route position 1700, this over here is route position 0, so I have about 1800 meters between the start and this turn. So I'm going to add it maybe at 1000. So I can drop it in kind of close to 1000, but I can go into my parameter set here and I can adjust the value directly so I can get it at exactly the same route position that I want. So you can either double click it or you can double click it here. That gives me the right position that I want for my proximity sensor that will have that cutoff maneuver. Any questions? So then, in addition to that, I don't have anything like a barricade set up or anything like that to tell my participant to make a left turn here. So how will they know to make a left turn without me telling them? So I can do something like playing an audio sample to tell the participant to make that left turn. So if I go to play audio sample, we have some predefined maneuvers here. You can also make a new configuration to have play a different audio sample of your choosing. So you can go in here and you can add your own WAV files or something like that, and have these audio samples being played. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add a few audio samples in here that will play before the intersection. That might be like an automation or a GPS map quest, something like that, that will tell the participant to turn and follow the specific route that you like. So what we're going to do is we're going to have it proceed left. We're going to put it a little bit before the intersection so they have enough time to react. The next one we're going to do is we're going to put another proceed left there. We're going to put a proceed straight here. And we're going to have another proceed left. Now, your route might be different than mine, but this is essentially what my route is saying. So essentially I added some more proximity sensors, and you can kind of adjust the position. And the benefit of doing this is that you can kind of make your changes, test it again, make your changes, test it again. You can kind of go through this iterative process a lot easier than what we had previously in ISA. So right now, this makes it a little bit easier for us to understand kind of what my route layout looks like, where all my different proximity sensors are, and my time sensors that I've added. So as I can see here, I can see all the different parameters that I've added, and also if I wanted to look, I can also see all the different route positions for each one of the maneuvers that I added in. So, are there any questions about this stuff so far? If you guys are looking for anything specific, if you're building a scenario or you're thinking about building a study right now, is there anything that you're looking for or looking at being able to do? If not, we will then save our scenario that we just made, and that will then allow us to save the experiment as well. So now that I've created my scenario, I can go and save my experiment, and I can test this out as well. So I'm going to go back to here and talk about loading maneuvers. So if you were to create a unique maneuver or a new maneuver, or if you were to import or take a maneuver from a different study, you can do that as well using these specific icons in SimCreator DX. So you'll see them on the right side here, and these are the maneuver icons. So this is Maneuver Designer. Maneuver Designer we'll talk about tomorrow, but this allows us to create some custom maneuvers. And you can open the existing maneuvers that we found in our toolbox from here as well. So if I go to File, Open, I can see all the different maneuvers in generic world, which are the maneuvers that I'm using right now. So if there's a specific one like the cutoff one that we just used, and you might want to make some changes to it, or you want to make something custom, you can open it up and you can save up a new maneuver. And you'll see here there's like different blocks, and we'll talk about all these different blocks in tomorrow's training. So this is very similar to how we used to do it in SGL, but it gives you a better file format to make it easier for you to understand. So since people can't really see this right now on here, I'm going to ignore it. But you can use these to import base maneuvers from like if you were to get an additional package from us, like SimADAS, or if you were to get in the future in SimCreator DX, if we release more maneuvers for you, you can use this load base maneuvers, and this will give you some additional maneuvers from the base maneuver directory. So if we actually look in our databases, you'll see these are where all of our maneuvers are being saved. So if I go to C, Databases, Exact, Experiments, there's a base maneuvers folder here. This has all of the base maneuvers that we provided for you. And then in addition to that, in your experiment folder, so there's the experiment files here, in the experiment folder, there's a maneuvers directory, and these are the maneuvers for that specific experiment. So we took the maneuvers out of the base maneuvers and put them into your experiment folder, so that if you're creating any custom maneuvers for that specific experiment, and let's say you accidentally kept the same name or something else, it doesn't override it for someone else. So this makes it a little bit easier and safer for you to create your own custom maneuvers as well. And then let's say I were to create a new experiment and I wanted to import my maneuvers from my old experiment, I can do that as well. So this allows you to select an experiment file and the maneuver set, and then you can pull those maneuvers over from a previous experiment that you've used. Okay, any other questions or anything about SimCreator DX? So that's pretty much the end of the basic training for SimCreator DX. If you guys have any questions or want to mess around with it, what we'll do now is, instead of looking at this, we'll actually run that scenario that we just made and kind of mess around with it a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Fusion, which I already have open. And just like what we've been doing previously, opening SimCreator, opening Fusion Desktop Sim, getting used to that.
How can I decide the car to cut from left lane to the right lane, or from right lane to the left? So this one is just a cut off from left lane to the right lane.
I don't think that was the one that... Was that the one that you set?
Yeah. Oh, I have no idea. But I think
Or did it just...
so, because it just appeared and then cut off from left one to the right. You mean that one's not the one
I don't know.
I think so, because I already got to the 10 left sequence. The word is so good.
So, let's see if I can do this. So another thing we mentioned yesterday is that I might see a lot of lag right now, and that's because I didn't run my load models maneuver. So before you start any experiment or testing or development, make sure that you run your load models maneuver beforehand. It does take 4 minutes to do so. Oops, sorry, kid. But it is important to do that. So that was the vehicle that I started in. So as I can see, my time to collision isn't correct because he spawned in and then automatically swerved into the lane. So I'm probably going to want to make my time to collision smaller, the value smaller, and then test and make sure that, like, okay, if they're going at this speed, it actually does the maneuver that I want it to do. So that's the best thing to do to make sure that it's working correctly.
But